just started.
There we go.
Okay, fantastic. Well, hello and welcome. I'm Dr. Samantha Herrick from the University of Scranton. I'm Associate Professor of Clinical Rehabilitation Counseling in the Department of Counseling and Human Services. I'm a Caucasian woman with dark hair and dark eyes. I'm wearing tortoiseshell glasses and a black sweater. My background is actually showing a little snippet of our really pretty campus here in the spring with our Naples building in the background and some lovely blossoms in the foreground. This is soft skills, an essential skill for employment success. And this is the ARCA virtual conference for May 2024. Welcome. My co-presenters are Dr. Janice Oursler, Weili Liu, Dr. Weili Liu, John Beninato, all from Rutgers University. And we're going to talk about soft skills for success specific to employment. Some of the takeaways for today are going to be to discuss the importance of soft skills for individuals with disabilities who are looking to gain and maintain employment, identify component parts of a skill, and how to subdivide that skill into steps. Explain how to develop curriculum-based groups for skills teaching specifically. Okay, a little bit on soft skills versus hard skills. Hard skills, of course, as we know, are the technical skills of the job. They are the task-related or task-specific components of a job. They're measurable and require knowledge and see-through of that particular skill. Soft skills, on the other hand, are non-technical skills. They tend to relate to how you work. They also relate to things like how you interact with colleagues, supervisors, etc., even a customer base, if there is one. But they indeed often impact performance at work. They're an important component of work that was often overlooked. So hard skills essentially mean that you can get the job done, but soft skills kind of mean that you can interact with others on your job, including things like your coworkers, customers, and supervisors. So we're going to be focusing today really more on the soft skills aspect of success on a job. Just a little bit on people with disabilities, employment. So 40% of adults with disabilities in their prime working years, ages 25 to 54 approximately, have a job versus 79% of all other adults, adults without disabilities. Almost 60%, 59% of adults with disabilities and have a college degree are employed, which is actually 10% lower than all other adults with a high school diploma or less, and 27% lower than all adults with a college degree. So significant disparities there, even with education. What we see is a sort of a great equalizer. So some of the things that get in the way, lack of knowledge about themselves, right? Self-insight, if you will, into what their skills really are, for that matter, both hard and soft skills. And also a lack of understanding of employer requirements. Sometimes this is a lack of exposure to job or to pre-employment experiences or to sort of youth experiences with work. And some is just not enough education or other types of experiences with work. So there's that lack of experience. There's lack of experience with things like interviewing for a job. And sometimes there's been noted to be a lack of some soft skills or maybe some limitations there that tend to get in the way of gaining and maintaining employment. So since we're really focusing on skills specifically, what are they? So a skill really is a combination of both knowledge as well as a behavior or an action. You have to know what the skill is, right? You have to have knowledge about what it entails, what goes into completing a particular skill or an action. And then it has to be paired with that action itself, that behavior, to formulate that skill. So is it a skill? So some of the things we've noticed in the literature as we were starting to do some research around soft skills at work was that there were some other mentions in the literature and perhaps even some mention of some interventions used that talked about quote unquote soft skills, but they were a little what I like to call sort of fluffy in terms of their definitions. They were things like communication and teamwork and positive attitude, or things like critical thinking or work ethic. But we're not well defined, and we're not really precise enough to be something that we could measure well, or for that matter, break down in component steps if it's not well defined and if it's not behaviorally defined, right? So it's not defined as a particular action or set of action steps. So all of those really are not skills, right? According to our definition that we've been talking about here. So one of the things we really wanted to focus on was making sure that we were actually teaching a skill that could be measurable, and then could be applied, broken down into steps, taught, applied, and then measured, if you think of it that way. So some other basic concepts with regard to skills. You have to be able to see it, right? It is a behavior or an action, so it has to be able to be seen and measured. A critical skill is an intense focus on one skill only, with behavioral outcome in mind, with a particular behavioral outcome in mind. That skill can then be subdivided into 4 behavior steps. And we really wanted to set a maximum of 4 for purposes of teaching, right? Many people can learn a skill or a behavior of some kind if it's 4 component steps, but any more than that starts to become really difficult to remember those steps and to execute them. And then there's an infusion of a body of knowledge. As we mentioned, the skill is a combination of behavior and knowledge. So that has to be included in the curriculum or how this was designed as well. And then the idea was that if the skill was learned and used well, it would make a difference in getting and keeping the desired role in the desired environment, and obviously in this case, the role of worker or employee. Okay, with that, I'm going to actually turn it over to my my co-presenter, Dr. Janice Oursler. I'll allow her to introduce herself, and she's going to talk more about the skills that we did specifically for our intervention.
All right, thank you very much. I'm Dr. Janice Oursler. I'm the elder presenter of the group, so to speak. I have dark hair, and I'm wearing a red top with a black jacket, and behind me is a background that says Rutgers many times over, white lettering on a red background. So I'm going to talk about the soft skills, kind of what we did. And that there's 2 parts to this. I'm going to give kind of a theoretical background about what is a content outline and what is a teaching method. This is the foundation of what we teach. And then my colleague, John Beninato, is going to give you an example of how this plays out in terms of presenting the information to a group of participants. So we go on to the next one. So we have curriculum right now for 5 skills. They are presenting qualifications, conversing with others. This would be on at lunch or on a break, asking for help on the job, responding to feedback when your supervisor comes by and tells you how you can do your job better, or when you have a regularly scheduled performance evaluation, and then navigating differences. This is about when there's arguments or disagreements going on at work. Should you get involved or not, or should you let it go? And if it is something that concerns you that you want to get involved in, what is it that you want to get from that, and how can you navigate that to try to get the outcome you're looking for? So here's the curriculum. It's planned in advance and it's written. It's based on 4 sessions of about 1 hour each. It's self-contained with all directions and forms for the exercises. So it does not require special leader preparation. And that's really important because, as you know, there's much turnover in agencies. And so if you have to bring in outside training to prepare people to deliver any particular intervention, it becomes problematic. This can be picked up and used without any training so that that overcomes that problem. However, the curriculum must be followed, and we emphasize that to follow the curriculum. So the curriculum is based on a content outline. The content outline is one page that summarizes the skill. It's a guide to playing the skill to be taught. And there are 5 parts to a content outline. The first is a skill name. The second is a definition of the skill. The third is the benefit to the person if the person were to use this skill. And that needs to have some individualization because skills may have different benefits to different people in different circumstances. Then there's a list of key behaviors, and as was already noted, the maximum is 4, again, so people can recall what they are. And finally, we have the performance condition. That is when would you do the skill. Oftentimes, the performance condition involves things that you would do beforehand in terms of preparing to use the skill and things that you may need to do afterwards in order to wrap things up. So I'm going to show you examples of the content outlines for the skills that we have and go over them briefly. The first one is presenting qualifications. This is about when you go on an interview, and it means explain to an interview the reason the organization should hire you. The benefit, obviously, is that it gives you a better opportunity to be chosen for that position. But what are the behaviors? And notice that quite a bit of this is beforehand. First, we would have people describe their major accomplishments from their work history. And then we would be identifying key self-management and transferable skills. Self-management skills are things like getting to work on time, working hard, and those kinds of things are very attractive to employers. Transferable skills are skills that you did on one job that can be transferred to another. So, for example, if you know how to do certain things on the computer that you did on one job, you could do those on another job. Then we have preparing for the interview, and this is taking into account what is the employer looking for, very important. What does the employer want? And then what do you have to offer that would fit what the employer is looking for? And then finally, we're actually at the interview and present the qualifications. And we would do this when you're called for a job interview. The next one is conversing with others. This is directed towards the lunch hour or breaks, and it is around talking about topics other than yourself. So the definition means engaging in a verbal reciprocal exchange of thoughts and ideas with other individuals. The benefit is that it helps you to socialize with your peers. So here's the behaviors. Again, we have one beforehand, and that's choosing topics for conversation. What are people interested in that you work with? And what are things that are best avoided as topics for work conversation? Second, we have demonstrating interest in what others are saying. This is actually once the conversation is started. Another thing we teach is how to change a topic. So perhaps this topic is not going so well, or it's something that you're really not interested in or don't know anything about. How do you change to a different topic? And finally, the 4th step is concluding a conversation. So let's suppose it's time to me to go back to work, but you still have time on your break. I need to know how to end the conversation, go back to work. And this would be when you're in a social situation with peers, such as the cafeteria at work. The next one we have is asking for help. Very important. And some of these can be used not only on the job, but in other situations. Asking for help means making a request to others to assist you. The benefit is that it makes others aware of your needs and preferences for assistance. So here's the steps or the behaviors in this. The first one is before, and that's to evaluate the situation. What's going on here? Do you need help for what? And when do you need it? Is it urgent or is it something that can wait? The second one is identifying methods to get assistance. Not every request or need for help involves asking somebody else. Perhaps you need to look at a company policy. Perhaps this is something that you can look up online. So you would think about what's the best way to get assistance. Then we have selecting a person to ask. Notice this is all before you've actually made the request. Should you ask the boss, or is it better to ask the coworker? Or is this a topic that's best discussed with somebody outside of the work environment. And finally, we have presenting your career request. So that's when you would actually ask the person you've selected for help with the thing that you need help with. And when would you do that? When you have needs or preferences at work or in other social situations where you'll need help from others to address your needs or preferences. Our next one is responding to feedback. This is when you get your boss comes and tells you how you can do the job better, or you have a regularly scheduled performance evaluation. So the definition means discussing with your supervisor your strengths and areas for improvement on your job. The benefit is that it helps you and your supervisor learn more about what you're doing well in the job and areas where you can improve. And most importantly, how can you make that improvement happen? So the first behavior again is beforehand. When might you expect feedback? Is this something that's regularly scheduled? Does the supervisor typically come around at certain times? Or is this kind of, who knows when it will be, but you still have to be ready? The second one is actually when the feedback starts is to clarify the feedback information. You want to be sure that you know what's being asked for and what the concern is. So you would say back to the supervisor what it is that the feedback is about. The next step is providing feedback on feedback. And that sounds kind of confusing. Like, what does that mean? Suppose there's a problem at work where things are not happening and your boss says, how come this is not happening? And yet it's something that's beyond what you can do. So a simple example, you were supposed to have copies ready at a certain point in time, but there's no paper for the copy machine. It hasn't been delivered. You would want to make your boss aware of this difficulty in getting the job done. And then finally, we have following up on feedback. It's important to check with the boss if there was any concern as to whether the boss or supervisor thinks that what you are doing now addresses the concern that the supervisor had. And when would you do this? When you and your supervisor talk about how you're doing on the job. And our last one is navigating differences. And that means recognizing perspectives of others and making them aware of your perspectives. So this is when there's differences of opinion at work. Very important to know how to address this. The benefit is that it makes you aware of other people's points of view and possible ways to address differences. So here's the behaviors. Again, we want to analyze the situation. What is the difference that we're having? When does it happen? Where does it happen? What's the topic? The second one is checking perspectives. What's your perspective on this difference? And what do you think the other person's perspective is? It's often very hard for a person to consider what the other person might be thinking about the perspective. Then the third one is choosing a path. Is this something we want to take up now, or is this something that we want to leave for now and perhaps take up later, or is this something that is best left alone? And then finally, we have exchanging possible alternatives. This is when you actually talk with the person about, here's the difference we're having, here's my perspective on it, I'm interested in your perspective, how can we work this out? And you would do this when you have differences with others at work or in other social situations. So let me talk a little bit about the groups themselves. An optimal size for the group is 8 to 10 maximum. The groups can be smaller. But the groups are very interactive with a lot of exercises. So if you have more than 8 to 10 participants, it's hard to carry out the exercises. It's a closed group. Once the group starts, you cannot add additional people. Some degree of literacy is needed because there is some writing and there are some exercises that points are written down about. And so you can help people with that, but they need to have some degree of literacy. We have implemented this approach in a wide variety of community agency settings, as well as state vocational rehabilitation agencies. And the groups have been led by master's level rehabilitation counseling students as part of their internship. And then the last part that I want to talk about is a structured teaching approach. So we have the content outline. The content outline tells us what it is that we're going to teach. The structured teaching approach, which is called ROPES, tells us how we're going to teach that content outline. So each of the content outlines, the curriculum is based, the actual teaching is based on the ROPE strategy. So here it is. First, we have a review. We talk about the learner's knowledge and their prior experience with the skill. How did it go? Did it go well? Did it not go well? It gives us an idea of where people already know parts of the skill and where we might need to focus more on the learners enhancing their knowledge and behavior. We also have a review at each of the lessons. As I said, there's 4 lessons that comprise a curriculum. And in those lessons, we go over the content outline at the beginning each time so the learners learn all the information that's in the content outline. The next thing we do is an overview. We talk about the content outline, the 5 parts of it. We also talk about the relationship to the overall rehabilitation goal. That is the relationship of what the person is learning to what the person wants to do. So people who are in the groups are people that are interested in employment or have employment. We want to connect what they're learning, the importance of it, to employment. Then we have a presentation where we have our lecture points, our demonstration of the skill behavior. We have exercises where participants practice the component behaviors and then put it all together at the end for the entire skill. And at the end of each, we have a summary where we discuss participant understanding of the skill and how to perform it, answer any questions, and talk about how to use the skill in target environment. So each group session follows this format. In planning the groups, it's also important to consider logistics, such as when will the group meet, where will it meet, and making sure that we have needed materials. Only materials needed are really paper and pencil, although we have also done this online. So it's quite straightforward in terms of materials. So that's an overview of the content outline and the teaching strategy. I'd now like to turn this over to my colleague, John Beninato, who will give you an example of one of the curricula.
Thanks, Dr. Oursler. So I'm John Beninato. I am a Caucasian male, use he, him, his pronouns. I have dark hair, and I'm currently wearing a black blazer with a sort of dark gray sweater. So as mentioned before, we want to take kind of a closer look at one of the curricula, in particular, the presenting qualifications, which is really designed to help folks get the skill of navigating a job interview and telling the interviewer that they have the skills that are required to complete the job. And the real focus of this curriculum is to answer the question, tell me about yourself. So as with all the other curricula, there's 4 sessions to presenting qualifications, and this includes a pre-post questionnaire and a satisfaction questionnaire. So the pre is done prior to the first session, post is done at completion of the last session, along with a satisfaction questionnaire. And we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go on. So as mentioned before, the most commonly asked interview question is indeed, tell me about yourself. But if we go to the next slide, it gets us to think about what is kind of the real question behind that, right? Because most interviewers don't really want to, aren't particularly concerned about what the person's interests, hobbies, things are. They're more interested in, do you have the skills to complete this job to which you're applying? So that's kind of the real question behind the tell me about yourself question, which seems a little innocuous on its face, but is actually a pretty deep question. So how do we answer that question? So let's go on to the next slide. And that is really kind of the focus of what this curriculum is designed to do. So for this group, there were 8 participants, all that had substance use disorders. You can see some of the demographic statistics there, about 29 years old on average. Most had about a high school education, and came with a fair amount of work history, about 8 years on average. And there was also very little attrition for this group. So 6 of 8 of the participants attended all 4 of the groups. So we can go on. So before the group kind of initiates, there's a lot of recruitment that takes place to make sure there are suitable candidates. This is usually done at the agencies themselves via word of mouth, talking to folks who are working with the participants, whether it be case managers, staff. If somebody is interested in participating, they engage in a consent process. They learn more about the intervention, the study, to make sure that they're interested and suitable. And after all that's completed, there's that pre-questionnaire prior to the group that is targeted towards assessing the participants' level of perceived comfortability with the skill of presenting qualifications. And so we'll go through the specific steps of this intervention. But as mentioned before, there's a lot of handouts and other materials that are involved, and everything is written down. So a flip chart or a blackboard is needed if the session runs in person. This is just a refresher of the content outline. It breaks down the behavior, the 4 behavioral components of the skill presenting qualifications. And as I mentioned earlier, the sort of condition where this is taking place is during an interview. And so let's take a little bit of a look at each session and how the rope structure that Dr. Oursler talked about is kind of applied to this skill. So in this first session, the review entails, setting the purpose of the group, talking about participants' experiences with presenting qualifications, positive and negative, what it's kind of looked like for them in the past, and also just kind of getting a sense of why they're attending this group, what they're hoping to get out of it. So after that, there's an introductory exercise, which we'll describe a little bit more in a second. And then there's the overview of the content outline, a little bit of an explanation of what interviewers are looking for and wanting to hear from candidates in order for them to be more likely to hire them. And as with any group, there's a discussion on group guidelines, including confidentiality, and kind of just setting the stage of how the group is going to function. So all that takes place in the first session. We can go on. And so that introductory exercise is really the participants' first step into a sort of a mock interview situation, in a sense. So they pair off into groups of 2 people who they don't know. And there's an interviewer, interviewee. The interviewer asks the interviewee for their first name and asks them that question, tell me about yourself. And that goes on for about a minute, where the interviewer is tasked with gathering 3 interesting things about their interviewee. These can be hobbies, accomplishments, any sort of things that the interviewer finds interesting. And then there's a switch where the interviewer, interviewee switch, and the same thing occurs. And so after everybody has gone and met with each other, there's a group discussion over what did that kind of experience feel like? What did you pick up from your partner? Potential reasons that you picked up those things. And then there's sort of this make the point that everybody has participated in a very brief interview with a 1-question interview, really. And so it's very, very similar to what a job interview might actually be like. So after all that, then there's the presentation of the skill. And for this first session, it's accomplishments. So there's a discussion over what an accomplishment is, some type of achievement in a person's life. This can be work-related. It doesn't have to be work-related, but something that person has achieved and gives them a sense of accomplishment. And all of these things are important to uncover, because when the person goes on a job interview, interviewers are really looking for that. What is it that you've done? What is it that you do well? And it's important that participants recognize that everybody has accomplishments in different ways and varying degrees, but it's important for people to uncover that and to recognize them and to work to deliver them in useful ways, so that the interviewer is more likely to want to hire them for this job, for any job. So this exercise, there's another exercise for this session on writing down an accomplishment from your life. Each participant takes a minute to kind of complete that. And then there's a group discussion of sharing what they all come up with. The added piece of it is there's the accomplishment and then what skills were needed in order to achieve that accomplishment. So that is sort of a group discussion question. And then the group facilitator will talk about the importance of identifying accomplishments from work history, volunteer experience, life experience, education. And then after all of those pieces, we get to our summary. For these groups, there is between session work. Facilitators can make the judgment if they want to extend any session by probably about a half hour. If there's a chance that folks won't complete the work between sessions, which can happen. So that's an option. But this first worksheet between sessions is work, volunteer, and life experiences, and it just kind of reinforces participants' process to think about what they've accomplished and experienced in their lives. And through this summary process too, there's a review of the content outline. The facilitator asks about reactions to the first session. There's time made to talk about any issues that may have come up during the session. And then there's a preview of the next session, along with a reminder of the date and time of that session. And so that leads into the second session. So you'll notice as we talk in our presentation and as I'm going through these sections that it is repetitive. That is intentional. So all of these sessions follow a very similar structure. And as Dr. Oursler mentioned, the curriculum lays this out very particularly and specifically for facilitators to follow. So a lot of times participants will say this is really repetitive. Facilitators get that feedback, but that's how it is intended to be. So the second session starts with review of the content outline, group guidelines, confidentiality. There's an overview of the topics for this session. And then there's a presentation of the two exercises for this session, which is presenting accomplishments and identifying transferable skills. Go on to the next. So the first exercise is presenting accomplishments, selecting one accomplishment that shows your ability to do the job you want. In this session and others, there is an attempt to kind of set up an interview setting. So sometimes these are thought of as fishbowl exercises. So two people kind of go in the center while there's outside observers watching these folks complete the exercise. So there's a person who assumes the interviewer role and it asks very simply, what are one of your major accomplishments? There's a minute for answer. And then there's time for group discussions over what folks did well. And the important point to take home from this exercise is that, tailoring the accomplishment to the job to which you're applying is really key here. If it's an accomplishment that doesn't relate to the job, then the interviewer may not place as much weight on that. So that's a point that the facilitator will make through this exercise. And then the second exercise for this session is this idea of transferable skills. So participants can identify what skills they possess that can map onto jobs. Right? They may have gained them through various experiences and may not be exactly in the way that the interviewer is expecting somebody to have that skill, but they still possess a skill that is useful and relevant to the job. So the leader kind of talks about what that looks like. And then there's another interview exercise of, tell me about the transferable skills, the related skills you have to this job. And again, there's the discussion over interesting points, reactions, feelings, what went well, and everybody engages in that process to give that feedback. And then that leads into the self-management worksheet. At the end of the second session, there's a reiteration of, talking about the two behaviors of the skill. reviewing the accomplishments and transferable skills, asking participants to identify something that they learned today, and something that they may take with them to an interview situation and how they might present themselves. The facilitator elicits feedback on the group, and then there's a reminder again for the next session. And that leads into the third session. So we have our review. We have the overview of the skill that will be learned in that session. This is self-management skills. Some of these things can include, being able to manage time effectively on the job, get things done on time, and there is an emphasis on measurable self-management skills. So the facilitator presents on the self-management worksheet that was completed, gives examples, and then there's also a handout on job interview tips that participants will review. And then there's the exercise on talking about these types of skills that participants possess that will make them more attractive to interviewers. So the leader demonstrates how to present it. There's that interviewer-interviewee role exercise, and then there's a discussion over how things went after that process takes place, what went well and what they liked, and then goes on into another exercise of participants recording their strongest skills. So up until this point, we've been talking a lot about accomplishments, various skills. So this is an opportunity for participants to really think about what are the strongest skills, 2 or 3 job-related skills that I have that are going to help me in these situations, in this interview situation. And putting all of this on one page so that it's easy for participants to refer back to is really key. And also it gets people to think about what do I have that will make me a strong candidate for this position. And then at the end of the third session, there's this summary. In the fourth session, which we'll see in a moment, that there's going to be a mock interview. And there's the discussion over the assignment for the next session, the review of the 3 or 4 steps that are already completed, again, eliciting feedback, and setting up the reminding participants for the fourth session. That leads us to our final session. So we start off with our review as we have. There's the overview of describing your qualifications. And for this session, there's an effort to be made to make it seem as if it is a true interview, and setting up the place where the intervention is taking place as would, asking participants to dress as they would for an interview, and kind of some of those other tips that are included in that sheet that was given in the third session. And all of these sessions have built to this final moment of, the tell me about yourself question. Go next. And so the major exercise for this one is the mock interviews. If it's possible to get an outside interviewer, that can be arranged. But as I said earlier, really trying to make it as close to a real quote unquote situation as possible. Each participant gets 60 to 90 seconds to answer the tell me about yourself question. And then there is a discussion over what the interviewee did well. There's a strong emphasis on focusing on positive feedback. There is an opportunity to talk about one thing to do differently, but these interventions and exercises are really designed to move away from negative feedback and to focus on building folks' strengths. As with all of the other exercises, there's a strong emphasis on discussing the entire experience among the group. Okay. And then at the end of the last session, there's an acknowledgement that this is the last meeting. Each participant is given a chance to talk about what they got out of the group. There's a review of the outline, the discussing the key points of questions, and the facilitator provides their observations on participants in increased skill. And then, as I mentioned at the top, there's the post-group questionnaire, which is identical to the pre-group questionnaire. And then participants get a chance to provide feedback over the group. They get to evaluate the group, and that feedback is also compiled. So I'm going to now turn it over to Dr. Weili, who's going to talk a little bit more about the findings through the questionnaires that I mentioned and through this particular intervention.
Thank you, John. So my name is Weili Lu. I'm wearing a black jacket, a cream shirt, and I have a red background. And I have black hair and brown eyes. So I will talk about the project evaluation, the assessment of how the groups worked. So we used pre and post questionnaires, which consisted of 10 questions using a 5-point Likert scale. We also used open-ended questionnaires that participants were asked about what they liked about the groups, what they would have seen differently. So, and the group facilitators also provided their written report of the group experience. We informally collected feedback from the directors of agencies that implemented these soft skills training groups. So I'll provide an example of the group outcome using one small group. So these are the pre and post questionnaires. When we say pre and post questionnaires, means that these questionnaires were given before the groups started and right after the groups were completed. So these are the questionnaires pertaining to interview knowledge. So how much knowledge they have about how to prepare for job interviews. So again, what you're seeing is 5 questions that were given to participants pre and post the intervention. And as you can see, item 1, I have a good idea about how to prepare for my job interview. So participants were asked to rate strongly disagree, neutral, agree, and strongly agree. And they were assigned scores of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, respectively. So a mean score of 3.6 at pretest means that they agreed, they were in between neutral and agree in terms of I have a good idea about how to prepare for my job interview. Post-intervention, you can see the scores have increased to a mean of 4.8, which means that almost all of them, on average, have strongly agreed that they have a good idea about how to prepare for my job interview. Item 5, similarly, you will see that participants have increased from feeling neutral about I feel confident that I can communicate my skills to an employer in a positive way to agree that I feel confident that I can communicate my skills to an employer in a positive way. So again, you see this overall general trend of moving from neutral towards these questions to agree or strongly agree. For example, I have a good idea about how I should dress when going on an interview. And towards the end of the intervention, all the participants strongly agreed that they had a good idea about what they should dress when going on an interview. So qualitative feedback we collected, we asked participants, what did you learn about the group? What do you like about the group? So they reported knowing my self-management and transferable skills. So a lot of them before the groups may not have known what skills they have possessed, what soft skills they have possessed. So by identifying their key accomplishments, for example, one participant reported he was the top salesman. He was able to identify his transferable skills as people skills, communicational skills, and he felt confident afterwards to knowing his transferable skills when going on his job interviews. They also liked our students. They all reported leaders were awesome. And when we asked, what will you do differently in job interviews, they talked about practicing more at home before the interview, prepare for possible interview questions, avoid rambling, and write a thank you note to employer. So overall, participants provided high satisfaction ratings. They wanted more sessions, and they would like to refer other friends to these groups. And we also collected feedback from directors of agencies, and agencies were highly interested in more groups in the future. So what have we learned? Well, we learned that by focusing on a specific skill would increase learning among group participants. Repetition helped, and we also needed more research in the future to collect long-term follow-up data in terms of whether participants actually did get a job or whether they had a better job tenure. So we were able to get a small grant. In this scenario, we adapted the groups into 75 to 90 sessions. We are also providing sessions instead of once a week. You can provide the sessions twice a week, 3 times a week, or 4 times a week. We also suggested other adaptations. For example, it's important to make the information visual, so to write down informations. And the group approach was initially developed for people with psychiatric disabilities, but has been used with people with other disabilities, such as people with visual impairments or people with intellectual disabilities, substance use disorders, or neurodevelopmental disorders. So there's another research paper that we have published when these groups were implemented at 4 state vocational rehabilitation agencies. As you can see, altogether, there were 137 participants with various types of responsibilities, and the group was on presenting qualifications that John has presented. And as you can see, the results were quite significant. And participants all increased in their ranking of how prepared they felt towards job interviews. We later did studies on telehealth delivery of these groups during the pandemic. And we actually found that telehealth was not inferior to in-person delivery. So you can see we used 2 curricula. One was on conversing with others. Another one was on asking for help. Both were delivered by Zoom by our graduate students in internship and during the pandemic. So what we have found was soft skills training delivered in groups by telehealth was as effective as in-person training, because during the pandemic, some agencies still had in-person groups. So we were able to compare those groups conducted in agencies where the groups were facilitated on the Zoom versus in person. We found that telehealth had better retention and the results were similar. So there were some considerations when implementing these groups remotely. For example, participants needed computer equipment, they also needed internet. The worksheets can be sent out in advance of group meeting, and breakout rooms in Zoom sessions can be used for larger groups. And we could use Zoom whiteboard to write things down. And pre and post questionnaires were collected electronically by either by emails or by we also used the red cap in later studies. So I'll turn this over to Samantha now, who will provide a summary of the findings.
Hi again, I'm back. This is Dr. Samantha Herrick. I'm just gonna sum up what we've talked about here in our presentation. So some of the things that we have identified as differences from other approaches to soft skill limitations at work. We've created a written curriculum, right? A manualized curriculum that has to be followed in a step-by-step fashion. It's intended to be able to be followed with little to no additional training for the purposes of sort of a quick turnaround and application of the manual. There's a focus on one critical skill at a time, and those are broken down into 3 or 4 very digestible and teachable steps. It considers the before, during, and after of skill usage. And the skill is taught in the context of an overall rehabilitation goal, right, or a person's valued role. And in this case, obviously directed towards employment. Some other differences is there's a systematic approach to teaching using the ROPES heuristic, the ROPES teaching guidelines. And then that is used in every lesson. Includes both the behavior and the body of knowledge to inform the behavior, right? So to understand what they're actually doing and then be able to put it into action. We write everything down. The facilitator is encouraged to make things visual, like use a whiteboard, use a chalkboard, write things out as processing things with the group. And there's an intentional repetition built into the approach, right? So that they hear things more than once. They're reminded of how things are going to be unfold and what was accomplished after the end of each session. And the idea is also to have behavioral outcomes. At the moment, we have self-reports, obviously from participants as to movement. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about what we would like to do in the future to continue to solidify this approach empirically. When implementing this approach, there's an ongoing need for some basic skills that are behavioral that have definitely emerged in the research and even have been observed by our facilitators, our graduate student facilitators. It's a select, curriculum, but you can select it to the person's needs. So if the client only needs to learn to converse with others, for instance, then a facilitator might choose only to teach that particular one. And we've also done a little bit with having it used one-on-one with the participants as well. So even though it is designed specifically for small group work, there has been a modicum of success with doing it individually as well. So it does have that level of flexibility for the practitioner's use. The need to assess, we do have a need to assess its effectiveness with various populations. As Dr. Liu mentioned, we've already done quite a few disability groups, but there's always a need to expand to others, into the sort of diversity of populations as well in means or ways that are other than their disability is also, of course, helpful to the validation of any study. And we want to develop more curriculum modules that address other critical soft skills that have been identified in the literature. And even one of those studies was done by this team, which was a focus group that identified the needs of individuals with disabilities in terms of soft skills at work. So some of our next directions are to assess if the curriculum really leads to behavior change. As we mentioned, these are pilot studies. They've been largely self-report, and we're going to start to try to move into that next phase within the next year or so, really seeing if an observable behavior observable and measurable behavior has changed pre and post the intervention. One of our intentions is to do this by, videotaping our participants pre and post, doing a mock interview, for instance, with that presenting qualifications module we've mentioned, and have independent raters determine whether there has been actual behavior change. So that is a plan or plans in the works for that. Need to evaluate the modules with different types of disabilities, as I mentioned, like some have been evaluated more with others and with a greater variety of participants and backgrounds. We're working on an ongoing fashion in validating the scales that we're using. The reports or the assessments that we're using are developed by the researchers, and so we're working to validate those scales against other more established scales that establish things like soft skills acquisition, and to develop a new curriculum modules, and then of course start the testing of those modules as well. More recently, Dr. Liu, who is our primary investigator on this research team, was able to acquire a NIDLR grant for what is called the iCareer study that is using the modules that we discussed today in an online or remote fashion. As mentioned, there's been a couple of studies we've done to pilot whether that could be done as forced somewhat by the pandemic, but we were able to find out that yes, they could, and they were not inferior. And so again, looking to expand on that in a larger federally grant-funded study. So stay tuned for that. In a couple of years, we should be able to have data and be able to report on the results of that study. So hope we see you again at that time. This is just a list of some of our publications we've produced. There's been 14 to date on these modules and on the soft skills curriculum that we generally call soft skills for work, which encompasses the 5 already mentioned modules. All of this being sort of feasibility and pilot studies of the different modules, as well as with different populations and so forth. So lots more work certainly to be done, but we have a nice foundation that we've been able to move forward with, and that has helped, Dr. Liu be able to get a more extensive grant for more extensive empirical testing of these modules. Once again, our crew from Rutgers University, Dr. Janice Oursler, Dr. Weili Liu, Dr. John Beninato, and not able to join us today, Dr. Ni Gao, and I'm Dr. Samantha Herrick from the University of Scranton. I've placed up here some additional information if you want to reach out to Dr. Janice Oursler about the curriculum, about the testing that we're doing, or any interest in participating or learning more about the studies we're doing on this particular intervention. And so we thank you very much for your interest in the topic. Certainly not sexy, but certainly really important. Getting people to work is what we're all about, obviously, as rehabilitation counselors. And I think all of us have talked about soft skills as an area of concern for some time. And so we've been working for some time now, greater than probably 10 years all told, on trying to sort of address some of that need with this small group intervention. So again, stay tuned as we try to roll out more and learn more about this intervention and its effectiveness. And again, we look forward to also your feedback on our session. And hope to see you again in the future. So again, thank you for joining us. Much appreciated. Enjoy the rest of the ARCA experience, the ARCA conference. We hope to see you in person again soon. Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much.